Hello, everybody. It's nice to see you all, even if virtually. I'm so pleased to be able to have as a guest in our course today, Father John Jenkins. Father John Jenkins is an expert in all things relating to St. Thomas, and in his spare time, he's also president of our university. And so I'm so pleased to be able to welcome him here and to talk with him a little bit about Thomas Aquinas. The reason that we're looking at Thomas right now is because Thomas Aquinas is really one of the first people in the history of the tradition to think about theology as a school subject. And in a sense, that's how we're studying it here, as a school subject. And so I wanted to start maybe, Father Jenkins, with a little bit of the context. What is the context out of which Thomas is writing, the beginning of the universities, and the place that his work has within that?
Well, Thomas lived, John, at the start of the 13th century, and it was the time when universities first arose. We take them for granted now, but communities dedicated to learning and education and inquiry arose at that time, and Thomas was right at the start of that. So what we find in him, appropriate to universities, is a more systematic, developed exposition of ideas and questions. What's very important to understand is that in the medieval university, books were very expensive. They had to be copied by hand. So most of the inquiry went on through discussion, through interchange. They read books, certainly, but a lot of a discussion about it. And there was something called a disputed question. When there was a question was raised, answer was given, objections were raised to that answer, and responses were given. What we find in the Summa that the students of this course have read is that broad format put into a work, the Summa Theologia, and that's what you should think of, a conversation going on about questions when you read the Summa.
That's really beautiful. It kind of gets us right back to the essence of the university as a place of conversation, debate, where disputed questions are aired and where people have the opportunity to state points of view, but also have the opportunity of the guidance of a teacher.
Absolutely, and that's important because sometimes people think of theology as this is the way it is, no questions asked, but it's just the opposite. I mean, it's an opportunity for wonder, for inquiry, and that's how Aquinas saw it.
Absolutely. So maybe now moving more closer to our actual subject of our class, in the give and take of the first article of the Summa, you have maybe a student raising their hand, someone saying, well, I don't see why there's any need for this subject called theology, because at the university, we only study stuff that's real. And the sciences and all the other subjects, including philosophy, cover everything that's real, everything that reason can reach. And so even God, philosophy considers God. So why is there the need for some other discipline?
It's a great question. Aquinas had this distinction between the object that we study and the manner or mode or formality, he called it. That's somewhat of a technical term in which we study. Consider this. Consider a great painting like Da Vinci's Mona Lisa. I mean, that could be studied by a physicist as what materials make it up, how it exudes light rays, by someone who's interested in the arts, its aesthetic qualities, or by a historian. What is the historical context, how they contribute to that? All are studying that thing, but they're studying in a different way, from a different perspective. Now, what's very interesting about theology as distinction from philosophy is that philosophy studies it as presented to human reason, simply, without any help. Theology studies it as God in history has revealed himself, has revealed the truths of revelation. So though they studied the same thing, they study in a different manner, from a different formality, as Aquinas would say.
Wow. And what if someone then said, well, what is revelation then? So theology studies God, I think you're saying, from the perspective of how God has revealed himself. Why would Thomas say revelation is necessary, or what would he say revelation is?
Yeah, that's interesting. There are two things that are very important to Aquinas and need to be kept distinct, and that is what he calls nature, and that is what is in the world by God's creation. God created the world, created with an order. You and I are human beings. We have the ability to reason. We have the ability to talk here, to make ourselves understood. That all comes simply from what God given us through our nature, through creation. But then, through God's grace, unmerited, unexpected, undeserved, God has further made himself known. Indeed, made himself present among us in Jesus Christ. And that is another way of revealing God. It's sort of two ways, two modalities, two formalities of revealing himself. And the reason why that second way is important is that God has invited us into a relationship that is far deeper than we have simply with our Creator. We have been invited to be friends of God, and only through the awareness, through the illumination that comes from revelation, are we able to realize, to achieve in a way that friendship with God. So that's why that second mode of knowing is necessary for human life, for what God has planned for us.
That's really beautiful. And so if I put your answer to the earlier question and this one together, are you kind of saying that, let's say philosophy can, by the use of reason alone, can come to an awareness of God as being or as transcendent, but you would never know if that being cared about you?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's exactly right. And there have been philosophers who have kind of believed in God, but they're called deists. God isn't particularly caring about us. But we would not know what Christianity proclaims, the depths of the love of God, and what God has prepared for those who love Him, as Scripture says. So it's only through revelation that we come to an awareness of that.
And so, reading the first article of the Summa, one of the other objectors, or maybe it's a student, a smart aleck student raising their hand saying, well, okay, so that's fine, but we're supposed to operate on the basis of reason. How would we receive something that in some ways beyond reason, or reason couldn't attain to?
Yeah. That's a great question, actually, because think of it. Think of how you learn, say, physics, just as an example. Okay, you're sitting in a classroom, you don't know anything about atoms and molecules and quarks and whatever physics talks about, but you sit in front of a teacher, and the teacher tells you, and then you go do experiments, and gradually you understand more and more. Now, ultimately, in physics, you can become a physicist, a great physicist, and you can understand it all, you can have great mastery of the subject. Now, it's very important, and this is very important for Aquinas. The subject of theology is God, but God remains mystery to us, right? Unlike atoms or quarks that we perhaps can understand, God is transcendent and remains mysterious to us. So we never lose the necessity of having God as our teacher, having God as our guide through revelation, but also through, very important, the Holy Spirit working in our heart, helping to illumine us. So in a way, you can think of that as faith, right? As my relationship to God as teacher, trying to guide me to an understanding that won't be achieved in this life, but Aquinas thinks, and Christianity teaches, will be at least fuller. We'll never completely understand God in the next life when we have the full vision of God. And in a way, theology is to prepare us, right, for that full vision that only comes in the next life.
That's actually a beautiful way of putting it. I never have thought of it in quite those terms. It kind of means that we receive in faith what God has revealed, but that faith means an openness to being taught by God and to seeking understanding, you might say, under God's tutelage or pedagogy.
Exactly, because so the kind of caricature, the misunderstanding of faith is you just believe without evidence. That's wrong. I mean, when you're sitting in front of a physics teacher, you don't believe without evidence. You believe because that person is an authority. Now, and you grow in understanding. Now, with God, you never get in this life to the point where I completely get it, but you believe because God has authority, obviously. And in life, as we live the Christian life, as we think about it, we grow. You put it perfectly, under God's tutelage. And Thomas spoke about sacred doctrine, sacred teaching, that it's a lifelong opportunity and project in a way to think through this, to go to a deeper appreciation of God's presence in our lives.
So, like you were saying, a kind of caricature of faith is that God reveals something, you believe it, and the door shuts. That's
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
Whereas what you're kind of saying is God reveals something, we receive it in faith, and that very faith is an openness to being led and to being taught, and under God's teaching to seek understanding of something that we'll never fully understand.
That's right, and that's why this is very important, I think, and very interesting, that the study of theology can never be completely divorced from the life of faith, right? With physics, you could be a really rotten person and know physics really well. But with theology, it's only by trying to live the life of faith, by enjoying the gift of the Spirit, by trying to grow in your life in a deeper understanding of God. Only then do you achieve real growth in understanding. And so theology is like other subjects, but it's different in important ways because its foundation is faith.
And so that kind of shows why is it appropriately present at a university. Because in some ways, if I understand you correctly, you're kind of saying that that the Thomistic understanding of theology would preclude a sort of fundamentalist approach. But it also, in a sense, precludes an approach that exists apart from faith. So it's kind of a middle way or something.
Yeah, when you talk about a university is a community. Well, what brings us together? Well, the pursuit of truth. Okay, that's certainly true. But is it simply our minds that are here, or is it our whole persons? And the wonderful thing about the university that Thomas envisioned is it's the whole person. It's the whole person with God, joining a community that can pursue greater understanding. And it makes it a special sort of inquiry that your students are undertaking here.
So friends, you can see why Father Jenkins is such a good university president, because he's figured out how to combine his subject of study of Thomas and have it inspire the way he looks at the university. And I'm very appreciative of that.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure talking to you, and I think your students are very fortunate to be part of this course.
Thank you.